So good morning. We're gonna see how this goes. I've gotten 3.5 miles done so far, and I'm waiting on my custard to get done. Uh, it's a protein custard, as I'm sticking with ketosis, particularly carnivore. And then I'm going to be going in the other room and doing some training. I do full body training as well as walking and keto carnivore. And I ruminate about such things that seem abstract to most people. And so if I get too many weird or negative comments, but I'd say the ones that outshine are the ones where people really see eye to eye with what I'm talking about. And those are the people who are recognizing the dilemma, the battle of building up a soul, and the fact that the soul cannot be denied. And so there's a Tertullian, the father of Western theology, 2nd and 3rd century, concept of the soul being Christian by nature. He was heavily into Latin, and he was referenced or referred to more as like the Latin father. You know, when you see him as the father of Western theology, it tied in part and parcel to Latin, obviously, at that time. And if you look at Ralph Ellis's work, that's not too far off from the factual historicals of when King Isis or King Jesus must have actually gone through campaigns, done his thing, right? And that there is, from Ralph Ellis's perspective, there is a lot of proof that everything took place. You know, all the biblical writings, those things actually took place, and there was a very big reason for that. And it does tie back into what I would say more of a Glenn Kimball perspective. Glenn Kimball was somebody who was on Coast to Coast for many years. The things that he was talking about were fascinating. Being able to tie them all together, I don't know if he could have done that in 3 lifetimes, but he sure was getting the ears of a lot of people, but he never really tied into that. I mean, if he was only alive now, right? But you could say that about any of us. That's the struggle. So a lot of this, in my opinion, ties back into John Dee's work, because it creates this reference point for this battle between what you would esteem as good and evil, right and wrong, a heaven and hell. That these battles are taking place within us, right? Angels and demons. And the battlefield may not be entirely present on the outside, but in effect, how this battle within us, our souls, as it were, do affect the outside world. And we see that very prevalent today. But as always, right? And it really does tie into, you have the Tertullian. Yeah, it sounds alike. Who knows if there's any sort of reference, but the English alphabet is not just simply a Shavian or Shavian concept where, you could make up your own symbols and signs, alphabet as it were, and that, it would pertain just as well. There's a historicity, and it's not just tied into Latin. There's a lot of magic, if you will, based around the symbols. And when you start to do something like when I was talking about taking the A or taking any of the letters in the alphabet and beginning to imagine and superimpose a movement pattern, right? And you begin by like making a capital A, right, side by side with another A, right, another A and another A. Soon what you see is you see a sun emerge. You start to see the representation of a sun. And I'd really gotten into studying this on my own and looking more from a position like John Dee, where I looked at energetics, knowing that eloptic energy is a real thing, and that Indian ink and the energetics that come from simply creating these juxtaposed positions, antithetical positions, and let's not leave out perpendicular, right? Because you have the advent of the L and the X, and that gets into an area where between in the English alphabet, when you get between the J and the P and everything that lies in between, right? L, M, N, O, P, right? You have a charting system. In the M, standing for mother, standing for man, right? Very pivotal, but you could almost look at that in a toroidal or circular fashion. And I believe that John Dee was, in his hieroglyphic monad, was laying out the expression of a mechanical representation of everything, right? But in looking at that, I know that he understood the precessional powers, like literally the rotational aspect of movement, planetary movement, and respecting, there was more of an aspersion to look into the right and left hand paths then more than now. But in his hieroglyphic, you see what I would only attribute to, the best way of thinking of it is more like a fork, with cryptocurrency, where you have these little chains that run off from one side to the other, but on their own, they make no sense, and they have no mathematical conductivity. But like a mimetic chain, in reference to the totality, right, of an on-running program that can stay on running on its own, right? And I knew people who were working on this, and it ties directly into non-Euclidean spherical mathematics. So you get into toroidal energy, right? Vortex mathematics. There's been research done on that tap into, some claim that there's an unlimited amount of power just by using the vortices of what could almost be looked at as like a string theory. So you get into Lee Smolin, you get into the physics aspect of it, and you see loop, right? I mean, what's the difference between a loop and a circle as far as a monad goes? A zero, right? An O, right? The O representing that. So you get back into the alphabet and you see the L, right, as a representation of the perpendicular. You see the M as a charting system, the volatility, but you see it as life. You could put it, you could overlay that right onto a circadian rhythm, and look at the polarization, depolarization, repolarization of the heart wave and the electrical impulses there. When you get into the N, it is an area, in my opinion, where you have that on-running energy of the M, but then there's a divergence where the energy could go from left to right. It could go one way or the other. And I think that the Z in the alphabet, that could be related very much toward Marduk. If you get into Billy Carson's talks on that, I think he's right on. But how Marduk comes from another name, right? As there was this transition from the belief system of one God force to the next, right? That there was this big cover up. So I'm not discounting the Tartarian influence, but when and where that took place and how it took place, it's very subjective, missing time, right? Missing technology. So the O, smack dab there in the alphabet, very much represents the monad, right? That this is a center point and that you have the right and the left hand paths. You have Paul, Peter, you have Jesus, right? The advent of the J and the shape of the J and how this J could be put onto a pattern that we see reemerge. You're talking about this toroidal field energy, but then you see it in exercising through its application in the water molecule, how quarks behave. You see this reoccurring theme of six and a center point, right? That there's this transitory state of energies and energetics, and everything seems to infer this Metatron's cube, right? If you look back into those energy systems, and LMNO, right? And then you've got P that I just discussed, but it gets into the individual energies through these spherical energy systems where it identifies one particular sphere or one particular branch or area of metaphysics, right? So again, you see the six spheres and you see the reoccurring theme with that. And I believe the P is looking specifically at one school of thought and highlighting that. And then you have the Q for quanta or quantization, where something has a challenge, a subset has been made, and a statement has arrived or been derived from that, right? And so I'm going to call this alive because I'm starting to burn my custard. Let's see how we're doing here. We're cooking this on the double broiler, but some very interesting things to talk about indeed.